5 o'clock, so we will start this final presentation of the virtual Sheep Vet Society conference. Thank you for those people who've signed on and those that are signing on now. I'm going to hand over to Yoav, who is our Senior Vice President of the Sheep Veterinary Society, to chair this session and introduce the final speaker.
Thank you very much, Philippa. Can anybody hear me all right? Good. Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending where on the globe you are. And thank you very much for joining us for the final session of our virtual Sheep Vet Society annual or autumn conference. It's been great so far, and we've had speakers from all over the world, and it gives me really great pleasure to present our final speaker, who is Dr. Cindy Wolfe from Minnesota. Cindy has graduated from the Virginia, Maryland Regional College of Veterinary Medicine and spent the last 33 years teaching students as head of the Small Ruminant Extension at Minnesota University. Recently retired and is now concentrating on solo veterinary work and rearing cattle, goats, and sheep on her home farm. Cindy is well known to many of us. She's a small ruminant representative of the American Veterinary Medicine Association of Animal Welfare. She chairs the Student Education Opportunities Committee of the American Association of Small Ruminant Practitioners, and has taken many key roles for the industry. So in these troubled times, if anybody can make America great again, it would be Cindy Wolfe. So without any further ado, Cindy, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoav. You're very kind. Can you hear me okay? Yep, okay. So normally on Saturday morning, because it's 11 o'clock in the morning, I'm at in the city of Rochester, where the famous Mayo Clinic is, selling lamb and beef and a little bit of goat meat and some eggs from our farm. And it's been very enlightening because as veterinarians, our career has been spent around fellow farmers, fellow animal lovers, and people who we relate to fairly well. And on the other hand, the public is very different. And they come and they think that you inject your animals with all kinds of things. They don't even know what those things are, but they ask them, do you inject them? And I don't even try to explain the value of a clostridial vaccination to the public. And then occasionally you get a compliment about the quality of your meat, and it feels good to be there again. Just like when you go to a farm and the next breeding season and lambing season, they have a higher, 15% higher lamb crop. It feels good about what you're doing. Anyway, a lot of the pictures are from our farm, good or bad. And I have some people to thank at the end as far as utilizing their pictures. I tried to use some pictures from throughout our country. So I'm in the north central part of the country. We have all 4 seasons, as we say. And so right now it's, as you would call it, autumn or fall. And it's a beautiful time of year. And then last time I visited Yoav, we had a horrible blizzard and couldn't even find the road. So it's not always beautiful here. Just like typical old professor, I'm going to start the talk a bit with some statistics, just so you can kind of see what our picture looks like in the U.S. It's not, as far as sheep production, it's not the brightest picture at the moment. I always say every year, it's going to be better next year. And so I have to ask you, Yoav, does my cursor show?
Yes, it does.
So this is my state. I live right here, so I can be in Wisconsin in 20 minutes or in Iowa in about 30 minutes. And so these are the big sheep production states: California, Texas, Wyoming, and Colorado are very big states for producing sheep. Montana, Idaho are some of the others. So let's just look at the situation. We don't have a huge amount of sheep in the US anymore, about 5.2 million. And what did the picture look like from last year to this year? Well, you have to believe that these statistics are accurate, and some people do, and some people are a bit skeptical, but in general, the numbers are down ever so slightly, some places bigger than others. And this is kind of interesting as we move over to the southeast. This is an area of the country where we first recognized anthelmintic resistance, and this is a area of the country where there's been a huge shift away from wool sheep to hair sheep. Lots of Katahdin crosses, Dorper crosses. And the reason for this is that this is an area where they grow tremendous number of nematode parasites, as well as in Texas. And so the hair sheep had some intrinsic resistance and became popular, and the ones that survived definitely had some resistance, and the ones that died no longer contributed their bad genetics to the gene pool. Anyway, this is what's not so bright, and this has been the situation for my whole career. I started as a veterinarian in 1984. I'm married to a sheep and beef farmer. If you wonder why I like them so well, it's because I do, and also because when you marry a farmer, if you want to stay married, you better like what that farm is doing, right? So anyway, throughout my career, this number just continues to be more and more negative throughout the country. This is kind of, again, a little bit frustrating for me as a veterinarian working with sheep producers. If we imagine this number is the lamb crop that survives. So it's not as stellar as it should be. I would love, before I retire from veterinary work and farming, to see these numbers be a lot closer to 200%. And certainly there are operations, especially in my part of the country, that they routinely raise wean over 200% lamb crop, and they would lamb multiple times a year. But these are our national statistics. Okay. I'm just going to move along because it gets a little bit repetitive. What are the breeding ewe numbers doing? They're going down. That's the message. All right, so one big difference between the US and the UK is that we carry our lambs to a much heavier weight. I'm not a stupid veterinarian. I know there's some goats right here, but the rest are lambs, right? And so the traditional US market is based on approximately 145 pound or 72 kilo lamb going to slaughter. And I think because of that, we see some problems that you maybe don't see as often. And one of those would be urolithiasis. Another that we recognize is some lung damage from Mycoplasma ovi pneumonia, and perhaps you are recognizing that, and I'm just not aware of that. And we think we see more of that in confinement operations. And another issue that I don't think we study, but I do think we should, is what's happening to those forestomachs as those lambs are on concentrate feed for that many months to that many pounds. So that lamb to weigh 145 pounds is usually about 6 to 12 months old before it goes to slaughter. And so that's kind of a long time on a grain ration. Certainly the lambs that make it to slaughter weight on primarily a forage ration. My bias, I should say, is that they're healthier. Again, nothing that will shock you, but our slaughter plants would really like these wooled lambs to be crutched before they get to the slaughter plant if they're dirty and wet. And so within the US industry, people have gotten better about making sure they aren't dirty and wet when they go to slaughter or crutching them ahead of time. Yeah, and what do you see here? We see a very big smorgasbord, I would say, of breed type. And I have not seen even 100 UK sheep operations, but I've seen a few. And I would say that there's so many that are much more uniform than this trailer load of our lambs. And not to make excuses, but my husband likes to change the genetics from time to time. And he also breaks our ewe flock into multiple breeding groups. So we do have the ability to sort of test out different ram types, if you will. Okay. This is inside the major packing plant. So let's focus on the right-hand side of the screen. It's very automated. There was a new plant built in California. I can't say how many years ago right now. I want to say about 5, but I'm not for sure of that. And so these are what the US lamb carcasses look like. And it used to be that pelts were worth something and the producer actually got paid what we call a pelt credit. And now I'm sure you're experiencing the same thing. Wool is worth very little and pelts are also worth very little. Are you good? Yeah? Okay.
Good, yeah.
All right. So I just want to share a few US success stories. This is a picture of Rambouillet ewes in Montana. They belong to a multi-generation sheep family called the Helly family. And they developed, after many years of working at it, a woolen product. They make lots of different garments now called Duckworth. So if you come to the US, hopefully you'll leave a few pounds behind on buying some Duckworth woolen products. But that's not a staged picture. That's just how beautiful some parts of our country are. So these are fine-wooled sheep. They would not do well in my part of the country where we have a much higher rainfall. Okay. Another use of sheep in this country, this is a picture from California, is some of these vineyards where there are lots and lots of grapes raised and turned into wine, utilize sheep for grazing the grass. And I don't know how these sheep are smart enough to leave the vines alone, but apparently they do. Okay, and then something that I find always interesting is how much a producer involves us in facility planning. And this is a friend of ours, has just completed a new barn. He's moved from cows back to sheep, I should say, and raising some Ile-de-France sheep. And it's a beautiful facility. It's made such that it can be cleaned, 100% cleaned mechanically, 100% fed mechanically when he gets it up to numbers, lots of airflow. And so I just share that's what we all love to see. And we certainly don't all see facilities like that on every operation. And I'm sure you're the same. In the US, we have sheep that are raised 100% outside, and we have sheep that are raised 100% inside, and certainly permutations in between. Much of it is driven by the feed resources. So in our part of the country, what we call the Midwest, there are lots of sheep that are confined because corn and soybeans are cheap. We grow a lot of them, so we don't have transportation costs. And those lambs are fed a heavy grain diet and pushed to market as quickly as possible on some of those operations. And those same sort of operations usually lamb 3 times in a year. That's not what we do at home because we have a different working philosophy about what a ruminant was made to do. And it just is our philosophy that they have 4 legs and 4 stomachs, and so they're meant to go get their own feed. And so we have a breed cross that we think is getting better at doing that all the time and sustaining our weather. Okay.
Can you a couple of questions, please, if I may?
Sure.
First of all, can you tell us a bit about the market? Because today David Slade from Australia told us that quite a lot of his lambs would come to you in North America. And as somebody from the UK about to experience Brexit, we will probably be looking to send some of our lambs your way. What's the ratio of import to export in the US?
Don't quote me 100% on that, but because I didn't bring that document in here with me, but the main importer is also our main processor, or abattoir, as you would say. So that is a company called Superior Farms. And I think they import some number around 30% of the lambs in the US. I mean, of the meat that is eaten in the US, lamb meat that is eaten in the US. And it may be a little bit higher. And I can check on that and always share that another time, but it's not insignificant. But we have bottlenecks, if you will. So with so few big processors, they can't have all the lambs ready at the same time. And that's the reason they do some importing, is to fill the voids left by the seasonality of lamb production. So for instance, California routinely lambs in the fall, and much of the rest, and some of Texas, and much of the rest of the country usually lambs in the late winter and spring and into the late spring. So we get these big rushes of lambs being ready, and we get these gaps where lambs aren't ready, especially May, June, and July are the big gaps. And so that company, to keep their customers, has found that importing was very valuable for them. They're incredibly good at what I call fabricating lambs. So they can take, I've seen them do it, so I want to say that factually, I feel they can take a carcass from a 180-pound live lamb, or a carcass from a 120-pound live lamb, and make the cuts all look very, very nice. They're very good at that. And so I think they can, again, take a lamb from another country and make the cuts look very, very nice. And so the customers seem to not be discriminating between country of origin in some locations. Certainly, I have customers who will tell me all about the lambs that came from Australia that they find in a company called Costco. And I listen. They're always cheaper than what US lamb is, but they're not US lamb, and they're not local. Right now, what I call, what all of us call, and it's unfortunate we use this term, the fat lamb market. So that 140-pound lamb, it's only worth about $1.10 to $1.30 a pound. And the lighter lambs are mostly going to an ethnic trade. And so the people who have come from other countries who really like to eat a 35 to 45-pound lamb carcass. So that your average carcass weight would be what, Yoav?
About 40.
Yeah.
That's, sorry, that's live weight, 40, 45
kilos.
Yeah.
Yeah. So hopefully I helped answer that.
Thank you.
One other difference we have is we have land that some of these very big sheep ranchers lease in the summertime. They often are publicly owned land. They look like that picture on the left, where there may be some forest and then lots of really good grazing, really good quality feed. And so those sheep go out usually in bunches of about 1,000 ewes and lambs together. They usually have, you can't see it in this picture, but they usually have a paint brand applied to them that's specific to that ranch. So if they stray and end up with other people's sheep, an honest person can say, oh, they belong to so-and-so, and call up so-and-so and return them. Those sheep are looked after by a sheep herder. We have labor challenges in the US, and so often these sheep herders are here on a special sheep herder visa, usually from countries south of us. And they live with those sheep while they're on public lands and move them to fresh forage, prevent overgrazing, and hopefully prevent predation as much as they can. That's getting to be more of a challenge. The picture on the right is actually, I think, an operation that's based in California. And that's just showing them they've gathered their sheep, and that's the size of the lambs after they've been 3-4 months old, getting loaded on those big trucks. And again, I don't recall, it's probably maybe not legal to have such a big truck in the UK, right? Your trucks are a little smaller. And certainly this is what separates a good sheep person from a bad one, is understanding how to load these trucks with minimal stress. Okay, so what's the veterinarian's role? To me, I need to understand the person. Why did they ask me to come out? And so I like to just sit and listen and see if that person's really wanting me to help them with their level of production, or do they really just want me to come and deal with individual animals, like the one on the right, who I think her ear tag was a 2012, so she's an 8-year-old ewe, and that's most likely the cause of her body condition score of 1.5. The fact that as a grazing animal, that's all she had for incisors. So what kinds of things do we do as large animal and mixed animal veterinarians? Well, for me, I get as involved in management as the producer will let me. Why? Because I have some experience in managing sheep, and so I'm comfortable with that. So when I'm there, I have learned, and as all of you have too, how to be, I don't think politically correct, maybe tactful is the best term, of how to say to somebody, your sheep are too fat, or your sheep are just right, or your sheep are too thin, and how will that impact their production and what they might do about it in the meantime. So we have a fair number of small flock owners who are women who tend to make their sheep too fat. And they sometimes don't believe me about the problems they might see at lambing until they have those problems. So anyway, we do everything similar to what you do, body condition scoring, breeding soundness exams on rams, assisting with all the questions that come at lambing time. I kind of reach a limit on how much assistance I can be at lambing time from a medicine standpoint, because I know there's much more I need to see and understand by being on the farm. So I want them to pay me to come to the farm to really be helpful. I started with a picture in the very beginning of lambs with paint brands. So for me, if people want to have minimal lamb mortality and they can manage to catch the lambs, then I really believe in the value of paint branding to stay ahead of morbidity and mortality problems, for example. I put this picture of on the left of the lamb covered with meconium because we have a thing in the US called Craigslist, and people can buy animals off Craigslist. It doesn't mean they have any animal knowledge. And so they take home a couple pregnant sheep and they, again, don't know how to feed them correctly. And they get very upset when things don't go well. And they're really the ones who need to go to school before they're allowed to buy animals. But we don't have any regulations that way in this country. And it's a bit unfortunate. So you get a meconium stained lamb that might be born dead because they didn't realize it was the ewe was in labor, or it might be just fine like this lamb. So lambing time management, some of my colleagues will offer a flat rate necropsy. They'll do necropsies throughout the lambing period. Hopefully it's only like a 40-day long period at the longest. Less would be fine too. And they'll say for this many dollars, we'll necropsy all the lambs that you can bring to the clinic, hoping the producer doesn't focus in on just sort of the odd problems, and that we can see what are the common problems and make recommended management changes. Some veterinarians in the US do some ultrasounding. Some of the ultrasounding for pregnancy diagnosis and fetal counting and fetal aging is done by lay people. I try not to get in the middle of those fights. So some states have veterinary practice acts where it's illegal to diagnose pregnancy. What I've seen over the years is often the lay people doing thousands or literally more than 100,000 ultrasounds a year are more accurate than some of the veterinarians who haven't had that level of experience. And that's why I have troubles getting in the middle of that kind of argument. But I don't have an issue with the lay person when they run into an impending abortion storm. I think if they don't reach out to that local veterinarian, they're really doing a disservice to the producer. So that's something that I always like to stress. Okay, I am very fond of nutrition and understanding it and understanding what this ruminant can and can't do. I'm certainly not an expert. I don't have any advanced degrees. I just have learning from experience. And so I believe that all veterinarians who do farm animal work should carry a forage testing probe and do forage analysis for their clients. I think the clients are well-intentioned. They say they'll get in touch with somebody who has one of those probes, but somehow the whole winter passes and spring comes and they haven't done that yet. So I'm a big believer that if that's the majority of the ration, that we should test it and help them with analysis. This man on the right-hand side is our right and left hand on our farm. And that's not a pet cow. And that's just an example of some of the clients that you all have as well, who have just incredible karma or rapport with the animals. So he moves our cows every 1 to 3 days. And they've become calmer and calmer the more he's around. It's amazing. Anyway, we good, Yoav?
All good. Can I ask you a question, please,
Sure.
Cindy? Again, here in the UK, there's a lot of emphasis nowadays about regenerative agriculture and soil health. Is that something
Yep.
you hear a lot about? And can you tell us what you do on your own farm? Because the US is a big thing, and I'm sure different people do different stuff.
So my husband is the student of regenerative agriculture, and I'm the observer and sometimes the question asker. So if we look at this picture of our cows, you'll say, wow, that's a lot of forage to leave behind if you were going to move them today or tomorrow. And in our situation, we have limestone geology under the soil. I don't know how far down it is, but it's such that water gets down, rainwater gets down into that water table with some fairly rapid. The other thing to tell you about my part of the country is we have some very high rainfall events. We had a bad flood in 2007 where we had 18 inches in about 24 hours, 18 inches of rain. Just this summer, we've had one day where we had 8 inches of rain. And so with regenerative agriculture, we're focusing on the health of the soil being such that the water that contacts the top of the soil can actually penetrate and go down, versus if you go and drive around some of the cropland in your area and you watch where the soils become compacted, there's been very little effort to add organic matter to the soil. The insects below the soil surface are not abundant and healthy, and you have a big rainfall event, you see erosion and you see water ponding. And so we have some neighbors who probably think we're crazy because we leave forage behind. We might only graze an area twice in a year. And the reason for that is the healthier you make your soil, the more productive the forage is going to be over the long term. And also the more soil we're going to retain. We're not far from the Mississippi River, and I don't have this picture to share, but I have a picture that was given to us of how much soil goes into that Mississippi Delta on a daily basis. You can see it from an aerial view, and it's pretty scary how much soil we're losing in this world. So that's a little bit about regenerative agriculture. We don't apply any, with regenerative agriculture, most followers don't apply any commercial fertilizer, but they do kind of funny things like make their own. So we take what you clean out of a barn, we might add wood chips that we get for almost free because the world's so populated, there's not enough places to compost ground up trees. So sometimes farmers can get those. We might add spoiled milk to that composting material. We might have a fire of wood stuff and put it out early and then put that wood, but little bit of burned wood in there eventually, and before it turns, don't let it turn to ash, and then apply that all very thinly to your pastures. And that's your feed, if you will, your food, in addition to the manure for for the microbes that live below the soil. So I haven't given you a very good explanation, but these people who are really serious about soil health, they'll sometimes dig down to see what kind of monitoring they can do of the microbes that are down there. And there's some fascinating women and men involved in the field who are worth looking up on YouTube and trying to get better educated. But that's what we're about. Why? Not because any of our daughters have said they're going to go into agriculture. We still hope maybe they will come back to the farm, but because we're trying to leave our little part of the world intact and better than it was before, if that makes any sense. In the US, we have a very bad problem throughout the country with coyotes, or coyotes, however you would like to pronounce that, preying on sheep. Once they learn that lamb is available, they love to come get lamb. And a sheep alone is, a sheep in a mob even, is really no defense against coyotes. And so there are lethal methods that are approved in some parts of the country, not in our state. And then there are non-lethal methods, and most of those are guardian animals. So here's a picture of a couple livestock guardian dogs. They've been renamed livestock protection dogs, and that's a long story for another day. Some people successfully use donkeys. Some people successfully use llamas. Some people successfully will run mama goats with kids and make sure those goats have horns. And those can be helpful. Some people claim that their woven wire fence is so effective they never have a coyote. Well, they just didn't meet a coyote that learned how to jump yet. So you can kind of see what our topography is. And I would not be exaggerating when I say to you, I can hear coyotes howling around us probably 95% of the nights. The way the protection dogs are supposed to work is you raise them with the sheep, they bond to the sheep, and they're supposed to deter the coyotes from eating the sheep. They're not intended to always hurt the coyotes. Does that happen? Possibly. It depends on the dogs. And the thought process is if there's a lot of removal of coyotes through lethal methods, that new coyotes will come into the territory and over time learn how to eat sheep as well. Other predators that we have that I don't think you have are eagles. Eagles are protected. They very much love little baby lambs. My advice to any sheep producer who wants to listen is don't leave deads out, and don't leave your mortalities out. And if you have eagles moving in and they're eating placentas, think about even picking up placentas with these pasture lambing operations, because they move right from placentas to baby lambs. I don't know how you're doing over there, but we have so much of the public who's divorced from agriculture and who really thinks that anything that produces methane is a bad deal. So I just feel like, at least in our little spot here in Minnesota and me at the farmers market, that we do attempt a lot of education of the benefits of a grazing ruminant. I even had a situation where our neighboring dairy farmer was pretty upset that our cows walked down the road rather than get loaded on trailer after trailer to move from non-contiguous grazing pieces. And that's a man involved in agriculture. Okay, what else? I love infectious disease. And that's probably one of the things that really drove me or made me excited as a veterinarian early on, and just watching my time. And so what do we deal with? And I would love you guys to educate me on foot scald control, but we see a lot of foot rot still in the US. We see a lot of caseous lymphadenitis. I think the shearers play a role in some of that. We have some flocks very interested in dealing with OPP, which I believe you would refer to as Maidi-Wiesner control. Scrapie, we actually have a federal national control program that's working very well. And then another disease that's very common and very costly are nematode parasites. Sorry, I'm very proud of my video. So I show that video of the inside of an abomasum to anybody who will sit still and look. So there's our friends Haemonchus. And in the US, we have a very significant handicap is our drug approval process is onerous. And because of that, costly, and other drugs that are available in major sheep producing countries probably never will be approved in this country. And I think that I'll end my career where that is the same situation as it was 20 years ago. And I'm extremely frustrated about it. So other control tools, I find they're really difficult for farmers to wrap their heads around, and therefore difficult to adapt or adopt, I should say. This is a picture from, I can't think of the reference, but Australian reference on larval survivability at different temperatures and time. And so to any serious grazers, I like to share this and have them think about where do they plug themselves in, what's their average temperature for us in June, July, and August. And so how many days would a pasture need to be rested to really get down where there weren't many larvae still around? Using other species to vacuum the sheepworm larvae off the pasture. There are some operations that can do this, but the majority of them can't, but it's good in concept. And then genetic control of parasites. So there are a lot of people working in this field, a lot of people also working on future vaccines and current vaccines. And I am thinking this is probably our best tool going forward. Other tools will be helpful, but I found that even testing my own sheep, I was very surprised at how significant a bell-shaped curve there was. There was resistance in a population. I'd been trying to select for that over time, but I hadn't been using EBVs because they only became available to us a few years ago. But that resistance already and lack of resistance already existed in my own flock. So I think that's something that for me makes a lot of sense. Okay. I still do a lot of individual animal medicine, surgery, reproduction, but what I used to try to teach my students is try to do the best you can at recognizing what's really a flock problem and getting ahead of it before it really is a problem. I find that some people just naturally have a better analytical mind than others. And so without some data recording, it may not be intuitive to the farmer or to their veterinarian. Some information sources I just wanted you all to be aware of that are US specific, not the information would be applicable to parts of other parts of the country, world, but you maybe didn't come across these because they're US based. So we have a group in this country and collaborators in other countries, and their website is wormx.info. And I find that producers don't always hear everything I try to explain to them. So I can tell them exactly where to go get a fact sheet on parasite control on the wormx.info website. They have a blog, producers love blogs. We have an extension agent in the little state of Maryland, unfortunately going to retire soon, but she maintains a website that has really got so much information, it should be called an encyclopedia. So I find that site, that sheep and goat site, immensely valuable for one, keeping current. Two, if I have a producer who's new to raising sheep or goats, they should go and do a lot of reading there. We have a company in this country who sells, produces, imports, and sells supplies for all sorts of livestock. And they make informational videos, not just about their products, but about situations. So that's them. Our national commodity group is called the American Sheep Industry Association, and that's their website, sheepusa.org. there are many good universities involved with sheep. I am a little fond of the Texas one because of their forward-lookingness in how they approach the raising of sheep and goats. And then we have our international, but mostly North American focused, the American Association of Small Ruminant Practitioners site. And then there's a Facebook site that's free. And I find it informative and entertaining to read at the same time. Okay, I just wanted to be honest that the demand doesn't seem to be growing so much for sheep work as it does for goat veterinary work. We have a lot of consumers of goat meat. These happen to be my little kids, produced in August. I had I exposed nine yearlings that had never kidded. I had I ultrasounded that 8 were pregnant. I thought I was really smart. I was so successful, right? And I found one that I found an aborted fetus at about, I got to think for a minute, about 70 days. I saw another one with blood on her tail a different day. Anyway, long story short, I really only had 5 that carried pregnancies to live kidding, and I had 10 kids. I had tried to bring some new genetics in, and I'm kind of a biosecurity freak. So my goats are free of caseous lymphadenitis, they're free of CAE, they're free of Johne's, and they're free of Q fever, to the best of my ability anyway. And so here I have these, you can't see all 10 kids, but I had 1 buck kid and 9 doe kids. That's how luck goes. Anyway, that's how to find me if you want to come to the US sometime and visit some sheep or livestock operations. I guess we'll see what kind of questions, and I'd be very curious to hear some discussion. We're trying to make progress on some sheep flocks that have had foot rot. Feel like we've made huge progress on the active cases of foot rot, but still having issues with interdigital dermatitis, or what I call foot scald, and very curious if anybody could suggest some next steps, because we want to have them on grass, and we can't control how much rain and humidity happens in Minnesota and the Dakotas and Iowa. It helps things grow. Or there could be other questions too.
Thank you very much, Cindy. Cindy, can I take you back a minute? You were talking about production limiting diseases, and one of the ones that we're really worried here in the UK is Johne's disease, so Ovine-Jones disease. Is there any monitoring scheme, or voluntary or non-voluntary, or do people do their own thing? Can you expand a little bit about that, please?
Well, you've picked probably the disease that's the most frustrating to me. And the reason is I don't think we have the tools. And you would think with today's molecular world, we could figure that one out. So, you know, if you were to go to a farm and you would say, let's test all the thin sheep and let's run an ELISA test, or let's run PCR on their feces, I'm still convinced we miss some of the infected animals. And if you were to go to that farm and say, oh, let's graze new ground to next year, and they're going to look at you and probably wonder if you've really lost your mind, because it's not a practical recommendation, right? So we do not have good tools available to us. I look after a flock of and herd of biotechnology sheep and goats, and we've been through Johne's before. And I even would treat animals just to prolong their life, to get more antibodies from them. And honestly, like in a clinical animal, my experience is if their albumin's low and they're thin, I don't mean they have diarrhea, right? They're sheep or goats, so they're just losing weight. They have a good appetite. And if I look at their albumin and it's low, normal, or low, I'm pretty comfortable that if we try to screen them for Johne's, whether it's ELISA or PCR, that we should believe the results or we should just say we historically had yonis, let's cull that animal. But I'm so frustrated that we don't have financially viable control tools. Sorry, Yoav.
No, thank you very much. We were hoping for something. No, but and you were describing sort of less than optimal number of lambs reared and sold. And can you comment about any way that you record production, number of lambs born, numbers from scanning to weaning, different methods of recording your performance, and then touch on where the losses would be, apart from predation, which is something that, you know, fortunately for us, we don't see a lot of.
So the most progressive producers who will lamb through confinement doesn't mean the lambs and the ewes stay in confinement for their life. It just means they lamb through confinement. We'll do some recording. The most progressive will actually be using your Shearwell tags. Shearwell has developed a pretty good market. It's not mandatory to use EID in the US, but they will use the Shearwell tags, which I find to be very people friendly and very sheep friendly. And what I mean by that is they don't exacerbate the arthritis in your hands, and they don't tend to get infected in the sheep's ear, and the lambs tend to tolerate them as baby lambs. The stick reader, again, is pretty user friendly. And so people who are really motivated keep those kinds of records. I would say a lot of sheep producers could benefit from using a veterinarian more at lambing time to help them identify the major causes of their lamb losses. And if they did nothing more, the producers, there are many good videos out there, including Mary Smith made a really, I thought, a pretty good one, where, you know, the producer could record the age of the lamb at death, how far into the lambing period they are, because as you know, as a practitioner, mortalities increase about 2/3 of the way through the lambing period. And they could do their own crude gross necropsy, as long as they had learned enough to know what the devil anatomy looks like. Because so many producers will send me these pictures of decomposing sheep, and they think that's the issue, right? Is all the decomposition you see. And it's like, nope, we got to have the Mary Smith approach, where you routinely take, I can't think of the right word, but you know, you catalog various organs or various tissues, and you capture them with a camera, and you send the whole package so that the veterinarian has a chance to see everything. We want to see the lungs, we want to see the kidneys, or the lack of fat around the kidneys or around the heart, and so forth. Sorry, I know I'm getting long-winded. So the most progressive people I find are using a Shearwell system, because then they can really keep track. One reason for a high or poor number of lambs reared and weaned per ewe is because historically the low cost of production meant that intervention wasn't of that much value. Now there is no such thing as a low cost of production, right? There's a cost of production, but none of it is low. Some is a little lower than others. And so people really ought to keep that data. I mean, how many people do we know who grow crops who don't keep any data? They all know what their yield was. They all know what their input costs were. And I'm not sure if anything but education can help people with that. Sorry, didn't give you a great answer. We do a lot of the same recording that is done there. It's just we don't do enough of it.
I think it's the same everywhere. A question about, again, is there a national system for electronic identification of sheep in the US? Going back to your Shearwell and yeah.
So I need to start the answer to that by saying that for the US to be declared scrapie free, which was the genesis of having a national official identification of sheep and goats, the goats have to be scrapie free, the goat population, as well as the sheep population. Our prevalence in sheep is tiny. Our prevalence in goats is small. The willingness to follow the laws about official identification, which is just visual, in sheep and goats is better for the sheep folks than it is for the goat folks. There's a lot of reasons why, but it's not because they're bad people. It's just maybe a little more organized and maybe less ethnic sales. So they're more traditional markets. We have a working group that spans sheep people and goat people working on, should we transition to electronic identification? If so, is it every animal that leaves the farm, or are there certain groups of animals that we could stay with, just knowing that group left? So for example, if I sell 100 lambs, they're going to go direct to slaughter, and I'm going to get paid on the carcass merit of those lambs. So that slaughterhouse knows those 100 lambs. So is there value in putting a 90-cent EID tag in them when they're just going to go right to slaughter and they didn't stop anywhere on their way? So we're working through this with the working group. We're leaning towards saying there are groups, subpopulations of sheep and goats that should have electronic ID. I don't know when it could be mandatory in the US. Clearly, if we had an FMD outbreak, life would change overnight, right? But if we don't have a foreign animal disease outbreak, at what point would it become mandatory in the US? Because that's what would be necessary. So one bit of advice we've been given is follow the cattle. If things become mandatory in the way of in putting an electronic ID in cattle, then it'll be easier for sheep and goats to follow along. And that is one bit of advice. One bit of observation is sheep in the US probably have the best identification system of almost every livestock species. So maybe should we just lead the way and follow your example, follow the example in Victoria? Something to be considered, but we're trying to go slow, so hopefully industry will come with us.
Thank you. A question about carcasses coming from Malawi. With a 70-kilo slaughter weight, how much fat percentage would you find on average?
That's a good question for probably a meat scientist, and I should probably know. I guess not to give you a non-answer, but because we have so much breed variation and so many different breeds in our country and different ways of taking a lamb to slaughter weight, it's really variable. And so is there a value to that fat? The cheapest lamb dog food, dry dog food that I can buy is $32 for a 40-pound bag. Is there fat in that? Yes. So clearly there are some byproduct markets that have some value, even though that fat is being removed. Do I think that because we're down to one major slaughter company, there's a lot of smaller ones, do I think they can affect change in what the US sheep looks like? In other words, more heavily muscled and leaner? Yes, but I'm not sure if I have the crystal ball to know how many years that's going to take.
Okay. There is a comment about predation in the UK, where in some areas it is an issue, and sea eagles at the west coast of Scotland have been implicated in snatching lambs, as you were saying. That happens your way as well. Perhaps my final question would be workforce on farm, which is something that we struggle with in the UK. Can you comment on that? How easy it is to find people, trained or untrained, to come and work on your farms?
It's become increasingly more difficult, which is why the H-2A visa program was developed and supported by the sheep industry. So there are individuals who come from other countries They work really hard, but there's also regulations on the length of time a day can be, how many days in a row, and so forth. So it's becoming increasingly more difficult. And it doesn't seem to matter where we're from. There are generations of Americans who think work is supposed to be Monday through Friday, 8 to 5. And unfortunately, from a farming and a veterinarian perspective, we know that that can't be true for every job. And yet societally, they seem to be affecting our younger generation's viewpoint to what they're willing to work.
A couple of questions. What is the average flock size and breeds that you see more commonly in the US? We've got time for a couple more.
I should try to look that up in the document. The average flock size used to be a number right around, oh, I'm just trying to get it pulled up, but under 100. And I think closer to 30. And some of the more common breeds really are the hair sheep. So they tend to be crosses of the hair sheep, would be the Katahdin and the Dorper, as far as the two most common hair sheep. As we move west, where quality wool is grown and worth something, we typically see the Rambouillet, the Targhee used a lot. And in the Midwest, where we're talking about out-of-season breeding or natural out-of-season breeding, you see a lot of an American-made breed, which is called a Polypay, which is a Finn Dorset Rambouillet Targhee crossed, put together in the late 20s and is now a fixed breed, even though, like any breed, there's a lot of variation. Terminal sires, still see a lot of Suffolks and Hamps used. Ours are a lot taller than the UK Suffolk and Hamp, which I always think is interesting, because unless you're selling part of a bone for a lot of money for a dog treat, I don't know why we need all that height. Some of them are as big as my mini donkey. I'm not exaggerating. And so when I have to do footwork on them, which is not uncommon on these 450-pound rams, I just do like they are a little horse, little pony, and I halter them, tie them up, and I lift their foot up, and that's how I work on their feet. I don't ever think for a moment that I could tip them up. I could drug them up. I mean, like, not drag, but give them drugs to look at them. But I have a deceased colleague who said, when they're that extreme, it's not good to kind of roll them around on their back, because they might have an injury after you're done. Anyway, you can tell I'm not into extreme anything except winter. So those would be kind of our most common breeds. And as Americans, there's all kinds of small flocks that raise what they want because they like them. They tend to be very good bill payers as far as veterinary medicine goes, but it's much more a hobby.
A question about mutton or adult use market for meat. Is that something common, or is it predominantly lamb production? It's
predominantly lamb production, and now in the COVID area, because I don't think we can say post-COVID era, we have a depression in lamb prices and a depression in demand, because somewhere around 45 to 60%, I asked about this statistic and we're not quite sure, of lamb prior to March was eaten by restaurants or eaten in restaurants. So how to fill that void, because the restaurant trade is not back at full capacity and not likely to go back to full capacity anytime soon. And so there's some companies now offering home delivery shipping, which is not inexpensive and not foolproof. But anyway, mutton, the last mutton I knew that was being eaten on any scale was supposedly there were some barbecue restaurants in Kentucky that used a lot of mutton. I've not been to them. And when I asked someone I thought would know, she said, no, I don't think that's very very big deal anymore. So some of the mutton, I think, goes south of us, across the border, and is eaten there.
Well, unfortunately, our time is up, so we're going to have to finish. So before I bring Nick up to thank everybody and close the meeting, I'd like to thank you personally, Cindy, for a fantastic presentation, a whistle-stop tour of sheep production in the USA. So thank you very, very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
And if Philippa and Nick can come up.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much, Cindy. Okay, well, like all these types of events, it comes down to me just to do a lot of thank yous, really. First of all, I'd like to thank everybody who's bothered to tune in and listen. I hope you found it rewarding and interesting. I know it's been a slightly different idea of things, but obviously circumstances have led us to do something that has been different. I, for one, have thoroughly enjoyed being involved with it, and I've found every presentation amazing, and it's a shame you all had to be switched off. I could have listened to you all carrying on much longer. So thank you to our sponsors, MSD and SIVA, for helping put this event together. A thank you to Fiona Lovett and Flock Health, and of course Philippa Page for putting the whole thing together and helping Fiona with the way it's run. So that wouldn't have happened without you guys. So thank you very much to you. And of course, a massive thank you to the chairs. So thank you, Yoav, and thank you, Amanda, for chairing your sections. And of course, I'd like to thank, above all, the people who have taken the time to present, starting with Dave this morning, who farms 15,000 acres and 10,000 sheep. I can't quite get my head around those figures, but it's true, I've been there. Felix and Juma, who put the case for PPR fantastically, and what a fantastic example of One Health and how we should perhaps try to engage more with managing these diseases to improve the third world's life, as it were. A big thank you to Professor Malaku Tafira, Precious Nastala and Lawson Shimaliro for their terrific work in Malawi, and they are a massive credit to their nation, and I was hugely impressed with those guys. And of course, a big thank you to Cindy, who's finished off our conference telling us about the American sheep vet story and how amazingly informative and refreshingly honest, actually, to tell us of how the American way. And it interested me that it finished the way Dave started, thinking how really important soil is, and how perhaps in the UK now, we have always looked at soil, but now we are having to take more interest in soil health, and it is a very important part of the way we farm sheep. So thank you very much to everybody. And unfortunately, we now fall into the AGM, which is perhaps slightly less exciting than we've already had. But thank you very much, everybody, and cheerio. And that's just staying for the AGM, of course. Thank you. So we're going straight in now, are we?